I'm going to explain two camera-related topics here. One's called field of view, and the other one is depth of field. To follow along, go to Working Files, open up the Photoshop projects, and then open up depthoffield.psd. We're going to work on two things here. We've got this 3D text. I just created some text in extruded text. I'm going to explain how to work with text in upcoming lessons. And I've got this topographic map of Mars, which I also extruded. It's not a postcard. It's actually something extruded, so I could give it a bump here, so it makes it have some texture. Let's go back to the text, though. First order of business is to talk about what's called field of view. So to see the field of view, I need to turn on the Move tool. So press V to get the Move tool on. Now I'm going to click on the 3D panel so I can see things. I need to switch to the current view, so I just click anywhere here. That turns on the current view. I switch over to environment, back to current view. Now it says current view here, and over here it says 3D camera. To me, they should say the same thing so it doesn't get confusing. So perhaps they should say 3D camera in the future. But nevertheless, 3D camera and current view are the same thing. And the properties for 3D camera include a couple of things. They've got this little field of view thing here, depth of field, and stereo. We're not going to cover stereo in this course. Stereo creates things that can be viewed with 3D glasses and other 3D means. We'll just take a pass on this one for the course. It's kind of a little higher level. But we will focus on field of view and depth of field. Field of view is just how you see things. And the default way to see things is with perspective, with a vanishing point. And that's what's turned on by default here. The FOV, the field of view number, relates to the scale, and there are three different ways to view the number: vertical, horizontal, or in terms of the lens length. But they all relate to the same thing. They all basically work the same way. They're just numbers that give you some kind of a relative feel for the scale. And this field of view here with perspective selected is exactly the same as the scale tool. I can switch out of the scale tool, for example, but nevertheless it'll work like scale. Go over here and start moving it. You'll see that it moves around like that, just as scale would. Let's settle it down for a second there. Look at the number. It's 11 right now in terms of the lens length. I go over here to scale and click on that and start changing it. Let go of my mouse now, and that number is going to change to the new number. So field of view here under perspective is the same thing as scale. All right. So why have that? Well, it's just kind of to differentiate between that and orthographic. Orthographic has no vanishing point. It still has perspective, but it's not the true perspective. If I click on that, you're going to see everything from the same angle, as if your head somehow moved all along there and saw things from the same direction all the way across all of those letters. There is no vanishing point here. So why bother having something like that? Well, sometimes it's important to see exactly how your stuff is going to look. So you switch over to orthographic to take a look at it from the side here and just see exactly how it's straightening out or exactly how it's going to appear. And then you can switch back to perspective. But most times you just keep it perspective and don't even worry about these views. Depth of field, on the other hand, is a pretty important thing because depth of field adds some reality, some verisimilitude to your 3D work. You want things to have a little bit of depth of field. Now, if you're a photographer, you probably know about depth of field. You set depth of field with your f-stop, with your aperture setting. A high f-stop number means a very small opening, means that just about everything is in focus. A low f-stop number means a wide open aperture, which means most things are out of focus. You have a very narrow depth of field, a very small range where things are in focus. And so using a narrow depth of field in a 3D scene can actually help make it look more realistic. So let me just show you how to do that. I'm going to switch over here, and I want to move this guy a little bit. So I'm going to get the rotate tool here and rotate the plane around a little bit like so. There we go. That works, I think. And we'll slide it over a bit, clicking on the drag tool. Maybe we rotated a bit too much. Let's try that. I think I want to scale it a bit. Go over here, scale it up. And now I think we got things set up nicely. Let me rotate just a little bit more. Give it more drama there. Okay, there we go. Now I want to give this a depth of field where, let's say, this is in focus and this is out of focus down here, or vice versa, but we'll start by putting this guy in focus. You do that inside the 3D Camera Properties panel. Right now, the 3D Camera Properties panel is open. If it weren't, you need to switch to it. And you can always switch to it by just clicking outside here. Go from Environment to 3D Camera. You can see that with the 3D panel open here. And inside the 3D Camera panel, there is that depth of field thing. Let me just close this down. Now, what do those numbers mean? Well, no one at Photoshop seems to know what they mean. Probably some engineer somewhere does, but they just are sort of relative numbers. Depth sets the sort of degree of things being out of focus. And the default is 0, meaning everything is in focus. So to see how things are going to look when they're out of focus, just go over to depth and just make it larger by dragging like that, or clicking this drop-down arrow here and picking a number that's pretty large. Now you can see all the things that are out of focus. The distance, 0.5, doesn't really mean anything exactly, but apparently it does mean something toward the back there. So 0.5 must mean something like over here. Maybe that's halfway through the entire scene. Who knows? But there you go. That's 0.5. I want it up here, so how do I get it there? Well, there's a couple of ways. There's kind of the drag and drop way, and there's also the targeted way. The targeted way is better, but I'll show you the sort of drag and drop way here. I'm going to slide this thing back and forth, and notice that as I get toward, let's say, point 1, I'm getting to the front here, left-hand side anyways. So that's one way to get there, kind of eyeball it that way. The cooler way to do it, and the more accurate way to do it, is to target it. With the Properties panel open to the 3D camera, you hover your cursor wherever you want the focus point to be, hold down the Alt key in Windows or the Option key in Mac, and just click. And that says, okay, this is what's going to be in focus. So go down here to the end, hold down the Alt or the Option key, get that target again, click. That'll be in focus. How cool is that, right? By the way, you can animate this stuff. I'm going to talk about how you can animate 3D stuff later in the course. You can create videos that have these animations, so you can change the depth of field over time. You can also, let's say, fly over something and have something be in focus in some places and out of focus elsewhere. But anyway, that's kind of a cool thing here. We'll just go here and click on the D again and have that be in focus. All right, I want to show you how you can use this with something flat. So I'm going to turn this off. Turn on this topographic map of Mars. Now, frequently when you have a flat thing like this, you turn it into what's called a postcard inside Photoshop. But this is not a postcard. This is extruded. It has some depth to it. It has 3 pixels in depth. So I did it so I can give some texture to it to really give it a feel of topography, a 3D feel of topography. So what I want to do is I want to rotate it, and then I want to put part of it in focus and part of it out of focus. Let's go get the rotate tool here and kind of tip it around a little bit. Something like that. There we go. I'm going to make it much larger, so I'm going to scale it up here, like so. And then we'll pull it back a little ways like this. I want to see these 3 volcanoes here. We could mess with this thing all day long, but I want to have those guys in focus and the distant things out of focus. There are little gaps here. It's not necessarily a good thing, so I've got this star field in the background that I can add there to kind of fill that in. Now, how do we get these guys in focus? The same way as before, we have the camera turned on. So I go over here and make sure we got the current view selected. There's the depth of field again. Let's set the depth to something significant so we can see it. Notice that 0.5 is off in the distance here at that point. Close you down, and I'm going to target those volcanoes. Hold on the Alt or Option key there and click there. And boom, now the little volcanoes are in focus. Let me go over here and have that one in focus. We have a very narrow depth of field here, so I'm going to change the depth to be a little bit wider. Look again down here. You got these guys all in focus and that stuff out of focus. Now, this is not the finished look again. I need to render it to get a sense of how the finished look will look, but this is a pretty good preview. If I click on render, it'll take quite a long time to render this thing to the point where it looks good. But I do want to show you that is the way you can take something flat like this, give it a little bit of depth to it. Notice how these things are kind of showing some 3D feel to that because I added a little bump map to it, and the little volcanoes are popping out a little bit. And then you can tip it on the side like this and get those guys in focus and those guys out of focus using depth of field.